Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. In its simplest form, foreign policy is really about three things: about values, interests, and power. I come from a relatively small country, Finland, and our toolkit is mainly about two of those three things. It's about values and interests. Power, hard or soft, is usually the luxury of bigger players. The power of smaller country arises from its capacity to cooperate with others. Smart diplomacy gives smaller player at least relative influence. The UN is, of course, case in point. Big players have power through their permanent membership in the UN Security Council. But we, the smaller players, can influence the ebb and flow of international relations by being active in the corridors of diplomacy. Now, most of the speeches that we've heard here today have highlighted the fact that the world order, balance, and dynamics are changing, much like they did after World War II when the UN was founded. I actually think that the post-Cold War order is over, but we don't know what the new order is going to look like. It will take at least 5 to 10 years for things to settle. And my message to this assembly today is that regardless of the size, each and every member state of the United Nations has agency, a say in how the new world order will look like. It is important that we all use this power wisely and responsibly. Now, I fully appreciate that our interests differ, depending on our geographical location, history, state of development, or culture. But fundamental values are something we should all share. We have commonly defined some of the most essential of them in the UN Charter. Today, I want to do two things. First, analyze where we are, and second, give my proposals on what we might want to do together. To understand what's currently happening in the world, I'd like to raise three different but yet related developments. First, it seems to me that there's a growing tension between multilateralism, in other words, an order based on the rule of law, and those that speak the language of multipolarity or transactionalism. So difference between multilateralism and multipolarity. Now, I can understand the temptation and the rationale of the proponents of multipolarity and transactionalism. But can they solve the world's biggest challenges, such as climate change or sustainable development? Today, I see many states, both big and small, pursuing transactional or multivectoral foreign policies. In essence, their aim is to diversify their relations with multiple actors rather than aligning with any one particular bloc. Now, this can be opportunistic, but it may also be justified and reasonable. This depends on political choices. A transactional or multivectoral foreign policy is dominated by interests. Interests drive practical choices of states, and this is entirely legitimate. This kind of foreign policy is based on a realistic understanding of power. Power defines the limits of what is possible for each state. However, values should actually underpin everything we do. Even transactional or multivectoral foreign policy should rest on a score of fundamental values. Without them, foreign policy will ultimately run into a wall. if you set aside values for unhindered pursuit of power and interests, you will eventually find before you the very same problems you wanted to overlook. Second, the balance of power in the New World Order is shifting towards the South and the East. Many countries, especially in Africa, Asia, Latin America, are becoming or have become key players in determining the direction of the New World Order. To put it simply, they have both agency and power. They are not only an expanding economic force, but their demographic growth is inexorable. This will also turn them into a political and cultural force. It will yield them both hard power and soft power, and they will use it to promote their interests as they should. The 193 members of the United Nations do not have to agree on every minute detail of values, but we have to have a common understanding of fundamentals. They include the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states. They include the prohibition of the use of force and the respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. These values are the building blocks of who we are and what we stand for as the United Nations. The broad international community has overwhelmingly an interest to uphold them. Let me be clear. Russia has no right to continue its aggression on Ukraine. Israel has no right to violate international law in Palestine. States have no right to use Sudanese or Congolese territories to fight proxy wars for their economic or strategic self-interests. I urge us all to heed this message of the international community and act accordingly. War is always a failure of humanity. It is a collective failure of our fundamental values. It is a failure of us as human beings.
In Jordan, we are determined to work for a world in which people are secure in their homes, are safe to practice their faiths, and are able to live and thrive in dignity. As custodians of Muslim and Christian holy sites in Jerusalem, we safeguard these holy places against actions that violate the city's legal and historical status quo. Compromising the delicate balance in the holy city will turn it into a tinderbox that ignites global conflict. And Jordan is serving as the main base for international humanitarian response in Gaza, working by all possible means to provide critical supplies of aid and food. And we appreciate our regional and international partners. I'm also immensely proud of the many Jordanians, including men and women of Jordan Armed Forces, who are at the heart of this effort. Ground convoys, aircraft crews, doctors, nurses, and mobile medical staff who work even under fire to provide relief. These and countless others carry forward Jordan's deep heritage of compassion and generosity to a people in grave need. My friends, amid such darkness, there is a glimmer on the horizon. We are seeing more nations stepping up on behalf of a permanent ceasefire in Gaza, one that ensures the release of all hostages, unhindered humanitarian aid, and support for the Palestinian people as they rebuild. We all know that force is no foundation for security. It is a prelude for greater violence. Repeated wars are teaching generations of Israelis and Palestinians that their only recourse is the gun. Security will only come when Palestine and Israel begin to coexist. Seems I have the same problem as President Trump. Begin to coexist side by side. This is the two-state solution, in line with international law and UN resolutions. An independent and viable Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital, alongside a secure Israel living in peace with its neighbors. For almost a quarter of a century, this has been the promise of the Arab Peace Initiative, in which Arab and Muslim partners around the globe extended their hand. My friends, for the past 2 years, we have finally seen the world's conscience stirring in the courage of ordinary people from every walk of life and every corner of the globe, raising their voices as one and declaring, it has been too long. This United Nations must echo that call. It has been too long, and it must act on that call until peace is a reality. Thank you.
Is the United Nations architecture we built 80 years ago up to task in the face of the challenges we are facing today? It is not. And multilateralism, dialogue, and diplomacy without institutions that function as they should are only empty words. We must recognize our limits. We must recognize that a profound reform of the United Nations is necessary and urgent, not an ideological reform, but a pragmatic, realistic one that respects the sovereignty of nations and opens to shared solutions. We need an agile, efficient institution able to respond quickly to crises, transparent in its mission and costs, capable of minimizing bureaucracy, waste, duplications. What we call the glass palace must be truly a house of glass. The reform Italy has in mind, starting with the Security Council, must respect the principles of equality, democracy, representativeness, and accountability. We do not need new hierarchies nor new permanent seats, simply because they would not solve the decision-making paralysis that has undermined the credibility of this institution. We are open to discussing reform without any prejudice, including on the basis of proposals already advanced by the Uniting for Consensus group. But we want a reform that serves to represent everyone better, not to give more representation to just a few. But to be effective, it is not only institutions we must reform, because we're facing a change of era. And this requires a profound revision of all the tools we have to regulate relations among nations and defend the rights of people, including international conventions. I'm thinking, for example, of conventions regulating migration and asylum. These are rules enshrined in an era when mass irregular immigration did not exist, nor did human trafficking. Conventions that are no longer current and which, when interpreted ideologically and one-sidedly by politicized judiciaries, they end up trampling on the law instead of upholding it. Together with other European states, we have raised this issue and tend to pursue it not to lower the level of guarantees, but to build a system that keeps pace with the times, capable of protecting fundamental human rights while safeguarding the sacrosanct prerogative of every nation to protect its citizens and its borders, exercise sovereignty, and govern migration, which impacts citizens, particularly the most vulnerable. The international community must unite in combating human trafficking. The United Nations, like other international institutions, such as the European Union, cannot look the other way or protect, in the end, criminals in the name of presumed civil rights. Likewise, the United Nations cannot hypocritically consider some human rights less worthy of protection than others. I'm thinking above all of the denied value of religious freedom and of the tens of millions of people worldwide, largely Christians, persecuted, massacred in the name of their faith. We also need a new model of cooperation among nations, but building it requires humility, awareness, and trust in the counterpart before us. Italy is seeking to do its part in this as well. Above all, with the Mattei Plan for Africa, in the last 3 years, we have launched our cooperation plan with Africa and extended its reach to 14 nations. We have built collaborations with the United Nations, the European Union and its Global Gateway, the G7, the African Union, and the African Development Bank, international financial institutions, as well as several bilateral partners such as the United Arab Emirates, whom I wish to thank. This complementarity has earned us last July the honor of co-organizing with Ethiopia the 3rd UN Food Systems Summit, the responsibility of being an active part of the major infrastructure project of the Lobito corridor between Angola and Zambia, the opportunity to build public-private partnerships that attract investment and deliver concrete results. As is happening in Algeria, where we will reclaim over 36,000 hectares of desert for cultivation, benefiting over 600,000 people. As is happening with the opening of the AI Hub for Sustainable Development, involving hundreds of African startups in the development of artificial intelligence, and as is happening with the extension of the Blue Raman cable to East Africa, linking India to European economies via the Middle East and the Mediterranean. We, unlike other actors, have no ulterior motives in Africa. We are not interested in exploiting the continent for the rich raw materials it possesses. Rather, we want Africa to prosper by processing its own resources, creating jobs and prospects for its best synergies with stable governments and dynamic, secure societies. But this path cannot avoid addressing an issue that can no longer be postponed: the debt of African nations. Italy plans to convert, over the next 10 years, the entire amount of debt for the economically least developed nations, according to World Bank criteria, and to reduce by 50% that of lower middle income nations. The entire operation over 10 years will allow us to convert into local development projects over 235 million euros of debt. This is an initiative to which the Italian government, especially in this Jubilee year, attaches great importance, and which we hope may serve as an example for other nations as well, because it is not only an economic matter, but one of justice, of dignity, and of the future. Dear colleagues, 30 years of blind faith globalization have ended. Its aftershocks were underestimated, and today we face unexpected consequences, which were not truly unexpected, grave in their impact on citizens, families, and businesses. Things have not gone well, contrary to promises made. And let me give you some more news. Things could get much worse if we do not halt the artificial creation of unsustainable production models, such as the green plans that in Europe and across the West are leading to deindustrialization far sooner than decarbonization. The conversion of entire production sectors on the basis of theories that ignore the needs and the economic capacities of people has been a colossal mistake, causing suffering among the most vulnerable social classes and dragging the middle class downward, imposing irrational consumption choices. Unsustainable environmentalism has nearly destroyed the automobile sector in Europe, created problems in the United States, caused job losses, burdened competitiveness, and depleted knowledge. And most paradoxically, it has not improved the overall health of our planet. This is not, of course, about denying climate change, but about affirming reason, which above all means technological neutrality and gradual reforms instead of ideological extremism, respecting the environment while keeping humanity at the center. Because it took centuries to build our systems, but only a few decades to end up in an industrial desert. And as I said many times before, in the desert, there's nothing green. Colleagues, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, this year, we're not only celebrating the 80th anniversary of the birth of this assembly, but also the 70th anniversary of Italy's membership in the United Nations, a double anniversary that places on us an even greater responsibility to uphold the founding principles and values of this organization. with the awareness that to do so, we must make the tools effective to defend those principles and values of our time so that our action may be more incisive and truly responsive to the needs of our societies. The choice that we have is simple. Either leave everything as it is, or take refuge in what is easy, or show our citizens that we will not waste the historic opportunity which this time, with its multiple challenges, has handed us to build a fairer and safer world. Because as St. Francis, the most Italian of saints, who gave his name to the city where this organization was born, said, "Difficult battles are reserved only for those who have exemplary courage." It is time, I believe, to show that courage. Thank you.
Madam President, we must ask ourselves today, how has the UN lived up to expectations? And just look at the state of the world. There are two significant conflicts underway, one in Ukraine and the other in the Middle East, West Asia. Innumerable other hotspots don't even make the news. The slow progress of the SDG Agenda 2030 presents a sorry picture. On climate change, the reality is of recirculated commitments and creative accounting. If climate action itself is questioned, what hope is there for climate justice? When a once-in-a-century pandemic hits us, we saw open discrimination in access to vaccines and to travel. Energy and food security have been the first casualties of conflict and disruption, especially since 2022. Better off societies insulated themselves by having the first call. The resource-stressed ones scrambled to survive, only to hear sanctimonious lectures thereafter. When it came to trade, non-market practices gamed rules and regimes. The resulting concentration exposed the world to leveraging. On top of that, we now see tariff volatility and uncertain market access. As a result, de-risking is a growing compulsion, whether from limited sources of supply or over-dependence on a particular market. Economic concerns have other dimensions as well. Heightened technology control is one. The grip on supply chains and critical minerals is another. The shaping of connectivity is no less sensitive. Protection of key sea lanes has become a challenge. Restricting the evolution of a global workplace is an issue. Each makes a compelling case for more international cooperation, not less. But are we really headed in that direction? And where has the UN actually made a difference? Madam President, as members of the UN, we meet here as sovereign equals. That is not a formalism, but a recognition of the inherent diversity of our world. Understandably, we have different history, traditions, heritage, and culture. For them to coexist, for them to enrich each other, it is imperative that we foster understanding and respect. This will only happen when we resist political interference and economic pressures, when narratives are free of prejudice, when double standards are abjured, and when pluralism is truly appreciated. Madam President, Excellencies, while asserting our rights, we must also firmly face up to threats. Countering terrorism is a particular priority because it synthesizes bigotry, violence, intolerance, and fear. India has confronted this challenge since independence, having a neighbor that is an epicenter of global terrorism. For decades now, major international terrorist attacks are traced back to that one country. UN's designated lists of terrorists are replete with its nationals. The most recent example of cross-border barbarism was the murder of innocent tourists in Pahalgam in April this year. India exercised its right to defend its people against terrorism and brought its organizers and perpetrators to justice. Because terrorism is a shared threat, Madam President, it is essential that there is much deeper international cooperation. When nations openly declare terrorism a state policy, when terror hubs operate on an industrial scale, when terrorists are publicly glorified, then such actions must be unequivocally condemned. The financing of terrorism must be choked, even as prominent terrorists are sanctioned. Relentless pressure must be applied on the entire terrorism ecosystem. Those who condone nations that sponsor terror will find that it comes back to bite them. Madam President, an objective report card will show that the UN is in a state of crisis. When peace is under threat from conflicts, when development is derailed by lack of resources, when human rights are violated by terrorism, the UN remains gridlocked. As its ability to forge common ground diminishes, belief in multilateralism also recedes. Central to the erosion of the UN's credibility has been resistance to reform. Most members strongly desire change, but the process is being made an obstacle to the outcome. It is imperative that we see through this cynicism and purposefully address the reform agenda. The historical injustice done to Africa should be redressed. Both permanent and non-permanent membership of the Council must be expanded. A reformed Council must be truly representative, and India stands ready to assume greater responsibilities.
Ladies and gentlemen, from the very moment the former regime fell, we set out a clear strategic policy built upon three pillars: balanced diplomacy, security, stability, and economic development. We filled the power vacuum, called for an inclusive national dialogue, and announced a government of competence. We strengthened the principle of participation and established a National Commission for Transitional Justice and another for the missing, ensuring justice and fairness. We are now proceeding toward electing representatives of the people in the Legislative Council. We restructured civil and military institutions, dissolving all previous formations. Through intensive diplomatic activity, Syria restored its international relations and forged regional and global partnerships and achieved the gradual lifting of most sanctions, and we call now for the complete lifting of sanctions so that they no longer shackle the Syrian people. Investment laws have been amended, and major regional and international companies have already begun entering the Syrian market, contributing through investment and reconstruction. Syria today is rebuilding itself through establishing a new state, building institutions and laws that guarantee the rights of all without exception. A land of ancient civilization and culture deserves to be a state of law, protecting everyone, safeguarding rights, guaranteeing freedoms, and fostering life to flourish while turning the page of a wretched past. We are determined to restore Syria's glory, dignity, and honor. And in continuation of the Syrian story, I declare before you today the triumph of truth over falsehood. Truth has come and falsehood has perished. Syria is reclaiming its rightful place among the nations of the world. This announcement is the echo of a great people's will, a people who forged glory throughout the ages, who rose again from beneath the rubble to restore their rights and freedom and dignity. On behalf of the Syrian people, I extend gratitude to everyone who stood by the Syrian cause, who aided Syrians in their tragedy, and who welcomed them in their countries, and to all nations and peoples who rejoiced in the victory of the Syrian people's will. And I particularly thank Turkey, Qatar, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and all Arab and Islamic states, the United States of America, and the European Union. And before I conclude, let me affirm, the suffering Syria endured, we wish upon no one. We are among the peoples most deeply aware of the horrors of war and destruction. For this reason, we stand firmly with the people of Gaza. For this reason, we stand firmly with the people of Gaza, its children and women, and all peoples facing violations and aggression. We call for an immediate end to the war. In conclusion, the Syrian story has not come to an end. It continues to write a new chapter entitled Peace, Prosperity, and Development. And may the peace of God be upon you.